Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Furby, and I'm a developer advocate and community manager here at SAS. And welcome to my talk today on time to rest. This is an overview of SAS API use cases on GitHub. And this is what we're going to do is we're going to look at a project that we came up with here at SAS to better explain some of our APIs, how to use them. And we want to present that to you today, the results of that project. So a brief agenda of what we're going to talk about today is, first thing is I'm going to give you a little bit of background for the project and a little bit of overview. We're going to actually look at the we're going to look at the pages in detail from the GitHub repository. We're going to look at the main page. We're going to look at the different language pages, and this will make more sense as we go through it. We're going to look at the use case pages themselves. We're going to look at a demo, and that should take up quite a bit of the time today. I think we can best see things through the demo. And then we're going to talk about you making contributions. This is something that we came up with at SAS, but it's something that is on GitHub. It is open source, so we want to make sure that we include others who may have ideas that they want to contribute. And then the last thing is we'll wrap up and do some Q&A. So the first thing I want to start with is the actual end product. And what we have here is on the left-hand side, you can see this is the GitHub repo. We're going to look at it in detail, so no need to try to squint your eyes and look at that. There's a link to the repository itself. And the repository provides basic end-to-end API use cases, and it's using both SAS via REST APIs as well as CAS actions being called via REST APIs. And hopefully that will make a little more sense of that as well. And we're going to use the provided examples as a guide for integrating with SAS via the APIs, but we want you to get creative and build your own use cases, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So a project overview, what was this project all about? Well, it was what we wanted to do was we wanted to leverage the knowledge of SAS users as well as developers to create a robust SAS API documentation hub with user guides and quick starts. And some things about the repository itself, we've segregated the examples by scripting language. So we'll see all of this when we get into the pages themselves. Each language directory is going to contain a project template. So if you want to create your own examples, we've got you started there. Each language directory also contains an authentication folder. Authentication is a big part of connecting to SAS via to utilize the APIs. Oftentimes it's something that people don't talk about a lot, but it's absolutely essential to running APIs. So we'll talk about authentication, and note that we are in these examples using password authentication grant type, which is the easiest to manage, but is also the least secure. So what we are showing you today is probably not something you want to pick up and put straight into production, but each individual environment, each individual SAS user is going to have different authentication and authorization questions and journeys. So we have lots of documentation out there that will help you through that. We do welcome your contributions. So once you look at these, you see them, you understand how to make the API calls, you come up with your own idea, and then you can submit that as a pull request. And we kind of walk you through that. And while it's not required, we would encourage you to contribute your code in multiple scripting languages if that's something that you are able to do. Now, I know that this information on the left is kind of tiny. Don't worry about that. We're going to look at the repository. You can also look at the repository at your leisure. But some specific things here is we have separated the examples that we have by language. So each language gets its own directory. And here we have Postman, which is not really a language. That's more of a tool that you use to make API calls. But we have Postman collections under there. And then we have Python and we have R. Those are the two of the more popular open source languages that we use to integrate with SAS. We included a repository overview. So this is the entire repository, what we've been talking about here, kind of an introduction to the repository, why it's there, what we can do with it. We included a video that's going to talk a lot about what we do here, but it's a 5-minute video, I think, or less. And it shows you how to navigate and how to do various things. And then there's the repository organization, how things are separated, how you can find different things, how you can contribute to the project, the obligatory GitHub licensing information, and then we have an additional resource list that will give you information about other resources that may help you out. So let's imagine here, sorry, let me go back to, let's imagine that we clicked on the R directory on the first page there. That will actually take you into the R language directory. And inside here, we do have a directory for each use case. Here in the R use cases, we only have one use case. In Python and in Postman, you'll find more. We are trying to beef up the R section, so you can also help do that as well. We have a directory for authentication specifically, and we'll see both of these as we go to the demo. We have a template README for new use cases. So if you like what you see, you get through it and you say, oh, we should really have a use case to deploy a model to MAS, then you could create your own use case, use that template that's going to walk you through how to create your own use case, and create a pull request for that. We also have a README within each of the language pages, and it's going to be an overview of the language specifically. And it gives you an overview. It also gives you any prerequisites. So this is prerequisites for any R language example that we have, and that's what level of R you need. If you want to run the Jupyter notebooks that are in here, you'll need to have Jupyter installed, things such as that. And finally, we have common variables. What these are is, every time you run API use cases, you're going to need to connect to the SAS server. Well, in one use case, we don't want to call it SAS server, and in another use case, call it host. So we want to standardize how we communicate variables throughout all of the code samples that we use. So we give you some specific and common variables that we want to use there. So now let's imagine that we clicked on the job definitions use case there, and that's taken us to the use case page. So this is where we want to be. This is the very specific use case. This one has to do with job definitions. What you first see are the code files, and it may be too tiny to see, but in the code files here for R, we have both Jupyter Notebook and straight R code samples that are equivalent. So you can choose which you prefer. We give you a use case overview. So this is, what is this use case actually doing? Additional prerequisites. So these would be prerequisites above and beyond what we had for all of the R examples. This is something specific to this use case. How to implement and run it. Okay, now we're here, we have the code, what do we do? And that's where you can go to the usage. And then the last thing we have here are the endpoints that we're actually using, and it has links to the documentation. So if you need more information about the API endpoints that you see here, we would have that as well. Use cases are currently available in the following forms. We have Postman collections obviously under the Postman directory. We have Python programs and Python notebooks. We have R programs and R notebooks. So we try to do the equivalent if whichever you prefer. We are accepting other languages and formats, and we're considering them. If you are a JavaScript developer or a Go developer, we would be happy to add that to the repository as well. For the demo today that I'm going to do, which I believe we are coming up on, yes, let's explore the repository and view a code in a live demo. The demos that I'm going to work on today, we're going to stick mostly with notebooks. You can go straight into the Python code, straight into the R code, but for demonstration purposes, it's a little bit easier to follow along with the notebooks, so we're going to look at those. We'll also be using Postman for the Postman examples. Terms and resources to be familiar with. So if you're watching this video and you're watching it on demand, you can stop. If you're unfamiliar with some of the things that we're going to be talking about, you can go research it and come back. You're going to need to know a little bit about GitHub because that's where all of these use cases are. We have two separate types of APIs. We have the SAS Via and the CAS Action APIs. So you may need to know a little bit, and they perform different functions. and they're documented in separate places. So just be aware that we have two different kinds of APIs, and you can find the documentation out there. I have a resource list at the end of this that has all of the links to documentation. There's a blog post on authentication to SAS VIA, and I highly recommend using it or reading it if you're unfamiliar with authentication to SAS VIA. You're going to want to install or be familiar with the Anaconda distribution. That's going to help us with our notebooks. And you'll need to be familiar with Jupyter Notebooks, the Postman application. And let me come back to that. And so now we're going to actually go into the demo, and we will see some of the things that we've been talking about. We'll start here in the repository, REST API use cases here on GitHub. And as you can see, we do have these separated by languages. So you can see there's Postman, Python, and R. The video that we discussed earlier is here as well. And the first thing we want to do is we want to show you how to actually get this on your local machine so that you can load it into your various programs that you may want to use it with. So I can just copy the link here. I can open an application, Git Bash is what I use, and I can just do a git clone, and I could paste it in there. And I'm not going to do that because I have already downloaded it. But what that would do is that would take a copy from GitHub, and it would actually put it on my local drive. And we can see the results of that here in my local drive. Under my GitHub directory, I have the REST API use cases directory here, and that's going to just mimic what we see in GitHub. We'll also see something similar here in a Jupyter Notebook. So we open this up and we are again in GitHub, and you can now see the REST API use cases directory is here. We're going to open that, and we're actually going to go in now and look at some of the code for several examples. So we're going to first look at the Python. And as I said before, authentication is the first part of getting connected to making your API calls. So you have to get connected, and then you can process your API calls. And we have facilitated things with an authentication mechanism here. And authentication in SAS VIA is a two-step process. You have to register a client, and then you can get an access token. That registering the client, the first step, is a one-time thing. You only have to do it once, and then the access token, you can refresh and renew as needed. So we're going to work strictly here in notebooks on the Python and R side. I think it's a little easier to go through the code step by step. And so when you open this authentication notebook, you're going to see here a set of global variables, and I've actually already filled these in pertaining to my environment. You would change these to your environment. We need to indicate the SAS server, the username, the password, client ID, and client secret. So we're going to register here the Joe client, and that's going to be carried through to getting our access token, and we'll see that. So I'm going to go ahead and run the variables. I'm going to get a client token. Again, this is a one-time thing down to the register the client. So now I'm going to register the client, joe.client. And now I'm going to run this last statement, and this is going to give me an access token. And I can see here that I get that access token, and I'm just going to copy the contents of that so I can use it in my other calls. So the next thing we are going to look at is we're going to look at, in the Python directory, we're going to look at job execution. And again, I'm going to open up the notebook. And so what are we actually doing here? Well, if we go back to GitHub and we go into the job execution, it says here it's going to create a folder, it's going to create and execute a job definition, and it's going to return the logs and the job output. So that's what we're going to do here in our end-to-end use case. So let me go back to the job execution. Now, I already have an access token, and I'm actually going to replace the old one that's here that got saved. And I'm going to paste in my access token there. If I didn't have an access token, I could uncomment all of this out, and this would run the same code that I just ran in the authentication piece. But we put it in here to facilitate things, because if you already have a registered client, you could then just fill this in and get a new access token without having to go to the authentication directory and generating a new one. So the first thing I'm going to do here is import some things and assign some variables. We did say that we're going to create a folder, so I need to have a parent folder to put that in. So we're going to call that folder public, or we're going to look for the public folder. And that's what we're going to do here in the first call. Now, how do we build the calls? Well, you can see here that this is in Python, and all we are doing is we're creating a URL. We are here not giving it any payload, but if we had payload, we would put it here, and then we create the headers. And that's our API call. And then we, in this response variable, we make the API call, and then we put that into a variable, and then we can parse the results that come back or whatever we may want to do. So the first thing here is I'm going to get the public ID folder, or the public folder ID, and that's going to create a variable called folder ID, and then we are going to use that folder ID here in this next piece. And again, we have our API call. Here's the URL with the endpoint we're calling the folders API. Here's the payload we're going to send it. We need to give our folder our new folder a name, so we're going to call it my API test folder, and we'll be able to see that if we logged into the SAS via GUI, we would be able to see that folder. And then any headers that we need, and again, we are going to process the response here. So we're going to create a folder, and there's the folder ID, and now we're going to create that job definition. Well, what's this job definition going to do? All it's going to do is it's going to create a file that's going to have this SAS code in it, which all it does is it prints out the class table from the SAS help library. So it's not a very interesting use case, but just imagine you can put any SAS code that you want in here and create a job out of it. And then we can call that job at any point. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, and we get a job definition ID. We are going to get that job definition ID just to make sure that it has been created. And you can see that those numbers match, the results here and the results here. Now we're going to submit that job for execution. So it's going to actually run that SAS code. So when I do that, it actually gives us then a job ID. So now we can use this to get the state of the job. Is it still running? Has it completed? So let's go ahead and run this, and you can see that it comes back with a status of running. So we're going to need to run this, and we say it here, do not run this next step until you see completed in the previous step. And you can now see that it took a few seconds, but it's now completed. And what we want to do here is we're going to get the results of the job execution. And it's going to give us this whole big long JSON, but somewhere in there, there's an HTML file that it generated. And you can actually see here we put in code that says, hey, here's the file that we're going to look for. So we can go out and look for that file here in this last test that we have. It says get at the execution results. So I'm going to run that, and you can see here that it's produced an HTML file. Well, I could grab that, and I could, and actually I have grabbed that, and we've put it into a file here. And so I took the contents of that HTML and I just put it into a class.html file. If I double click on that, you can see here that it comes back with the SAS data set that I asked for. So you can see how you can then open up and create lots of code within your Jupyter notebook so you can achieve lots of different tasks. This is just one example. So that is an example in Python. Let's go back up to the REST API use cases directory, and let's look at a quick example in R. So here we are going to go in, again, we could go into authentication and we could go through the same steps of registering the client, getting an access token. We've already registered the client though. That's universal and we can use that. It's a one-time thing that we need to do. So we don't really need to go into authentication here. We'll go straight into job execution. And here under job execution for R, we have job definition CRUD. So that's going to be creating, reading, updating, and deleting a job. And then there's job execution, which would actually run the job. So it's a two-step process here. You could combine these into one, but let's go ahead and open the job definition CRUD. And the first thing we have here is the authentication. So again, we now, you can see that things aren't commented out here like they were in the Python example. What I can do is, since I already have a client, my Joe client, I can just indicate it here, and this is going to run a task that will generate a new access token. And so now I can, I've saved that access token off here in this statement, and now I can use that throughout the rest of this use case. So the first thing, and how this use case works is we create a function in one step. So here I'm creating a list all jobs function, and then in the next step we run that function. So here I'm going to create a function, and I get no response back. If I don't get an error, then everything's good. And then I can run this function, and you can see that it's bringing me back all of the jobs that exist out there currently. Well, now I want to create my own job definition. So you can see again here, I'm running this, I'm creating a job that runs the same exact code that I ran in the Python example. This is just in R, so I'm going to go ahead and run that. And again, that's just creating the function, and then I can run that function. So this is going to create the job definition, and I get information back. Here is the ID of the job definition, so that may be good and handy to have later on. We can now create a function that's going to get the job. So we're going to give it all of the parameter information to try to get the job ID so we can refer to it again. And we are going to create that function, and now we're going to run that function. And again, we should get back the same ID that we got back before. If we want to update that job, here is an update. And so if you remember, we were just printing out the class table. Well, now we're going to actually add a filter to it that's going to say, hey, give me everybody that is over the age of 10. So here we have a default value of 10, and we're going to say where age is greater than the age that we have put up here. So this is simply going to update the job definition. So here's the ID, that hasn't changed. We've just updated the information for it. Let's go ahead and run that so that it has now happened, and you can see that the ID is again still the same. And if we wanted to delete that job, we could go ahead and create the function to delete the job, and then we could delete the job. We could uncomment these if you wanted to do that. So that is an example of R, again, how we can do an end-to-end example strictly using the API calls. The last example I would like to show you is here in Postman. And if you have downloaded the repository from GitHub to your local machine, you could come in here into Postman, which is just a tool to run REST API calls. It's a helper tool, and we'll see it in action here. But what I could do is I could import a collection here, and that's how we export our API use cases in Postman. We export them in a collection, and then you could import them into your environment. And so what you would see here is you would see an end-to-end text analytics collection over in GitHub. And due to time, I won't show that at this point, but just realize that it's there. You've cloned your repository, and now we've imported it here into Postman. Well, if I want to first get an access token, again, I've got variables set up here, both for the test case as well as environment variables, which we could see here. What I'm going to do is go ahead and run this, and you can see that we do get an access token back. Right? If we wanted to start from scratch, we could download the authentication process and import that into our Postman application as a Postman collection, and we could run that. But since we have already registered a client, we just added this to this collection, and now we are getting ready to create a CAS session. So this is just making a connection to SAS. So we'll go ahead and run that, and we have a session ID now. And then we are going to upload some data. So what we're doing here is we're doing a sentiment analysis. So we're going to upload some phrases, and then SAS is going to run against the model within SAS these phrases and come back whether this is a positive or a negative sentiment. So we have here, today it rained, we didn't go to school. Well, that could be good and bad. It's bad because it rained, but we didn't go to school, so that's probably good. Our team won the game. The funeral was a sad event. So we're going to upload this data, and then we're going to run some analysis on it. So I've uploaded the data. Now I'm going to call the model that's going to run the analysis on that. And I'm going to now then get the sentiment data. And we'll just scroll down here and we'll just look at the first few. Remember, the first one was very neutral because it rained, but we didn't go to school. And you can see it got a score of 0.5, and this is on a scale of 0 to 1. So that's actually right in the middle. The second one was something about we won the game, so that's got a positive. And then it rained outside, or the funeral was sad, and you can see that got a negative sentiment. So again, we're making API calls, we're running end-to-end examples, and actually I forgot, if I want to drop the table, be a good steward and get rid of that information. If I want to run this again, I can do that. But you can see how we run these from end to end to accomplish a task, not just a single API call. And now we're going to go back to our slides. So how do you help out? How can you participate? Well, you can make contributions. Hopefully you've been inspired by some of the stuff you've seen and some of the cool things that you can do with the SAS APIs. You want to refer to the contributing section of the main page in the repository. That's going to give you some broad information about contributing to it. Under each language directory, as I mentioned earlier, there is a template README file. So that's going to give you information. That's going to be where you want to get it started. And then once you get in there, it actually gives you step-by-step instructions everywhere from creating a new directory with your use case to doing a pull request that's going to be evaluated by the SAS maintainers of that repository. Here are some of the resources, just a list of things, so you can click on those. It will take you to various resources out there on the internet, or webinars, just lots of different things that are going to help you dealing with your APIs in SAS. So I want to thank you for your time. Here's my contact information if you'd like to get in touch with me. And I believe we will now move into the QA section of the presentation. Thanks a lot, and I appreciate your time.